So hi and welcome in this new tutorial where we are going to use the 3D camera tracker. The 3D camera tracker is a very exciting feature. Sometimes it's also called in other software match moving. And what it basically does is we have this shot here. So I have some footage here from Ruin, which I dragged into a new composition. So this is the composition. And it's a shot of a camera moving over some ancient walls somewhere, I think in Israel. Okay, it's another Dissolve shot. You see the Dissolve logo here. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to have After Effects calculate this camera movement and create a virtual camera based on the real camera movement that was made into this shot. To do this, you need to select your layer. You need to have your tracker window open. So that's basically what I have over here. And when all this is done, you just simply hit this track camera. At that point, After Effects is going to analyze your footage in the background. While he's doing this, you can still, continue working because it's a process in the background. And basically frame by frame, After Effects is going to track some features into this footage and try to hold them as long as possible, and then calculate a camera based on all those tracked features. So once the analysis is done, he's going to solve the camera. So this takes a little moment. It takes, I think, just as long as the analysis. And as soon as After Effects is going to be done, what you see here, so he's done, what you see here is a whole bunch of track points that After Effects has been able to track. Some of them come, some of them go. To have a look at this while I can hit the play button, what you can do is say render track points. It's something you usually turn off. And then if you hit this button to play, then you will see all the track points come and go, and some will stay for a long time, some will only pop up for a small time. And After Effects is basically going to solve a camera movement based on all these different kinds of track points. Okay, so what is important about this is that the track points that you see here, they all have a different color. That's very nice. And basically the size of the track points tell you how close they are to the camera. So these track points here in the foreground are pretty big. And when you see here in the background, there's some track points, and they're all getting smaller and smaller. And the further I go into the scene, the smaller the track points are going to be. So that's one thing to have a look at once it's been tracked. To look at is when you hover with your mouse, just not pushing any buttons, but just hover with the mouse, you will see a target. And the target is basically going to connect three of these track points. So when I rest my mouse over here, you will see that the three track points around it are being used to make this target, and it will give you an idea of what the surface is that it's going over. So you see it's a bit of a bumpy surface. That is correct. And actually you can see that when I hover over this wall here, you see the perspective completely changes, and when I go all the way to the back and when I hover over this wall. So this gives you quite a bit of an idea of how this track is actually going on. And what's also important here is to look in the advanced, to look at the average error. In the perfect computer world, which does not exist, this average error would be 0. But of course there are always some small errors by track points, for instance, track points like these, which are not stuck to anything in particular, and so they will give an error, and based on all the calculations, there's an average error of 0.32 pixels. What I'm gonna do Next, before I'm gonna start putting in some stuff here and create a camera, is and that's something you have to basically think of as an optional feature. But I like to do it just to make sure that everything is fine, is I'm going to do a detailed analysis. And what that is going to do, I'm just going to hit this button. So After Effects is going to reanalyze the footage. It's going to take a lot longer, a bit longer. And he's actually going to try to track more points than he did with the previous calculation. So I'm just going to pause the video for a second and we'll wait till the camera is solved again. So it's done. It took quite some time. I think it took about 5 minutes to recalculate and solve the camera. And what you see now is that After Effects actually calculated a whole lot more points than it did in the normal analysis. We have an average error of 0.38 pixels, which is good. So basically you should definitely stay under 1. And so this is a very good figure. But also I have to mention that this is a typical, very easy to solve kind of footage. Why? Because, I mean, there's a lot of detail in this scene. I mean, all these rocks, these ancient rocks are giving us a lot of detail that can be tracked. And another important thing is nothing or nobody is moving into this scene. So if I would have had a person here walking from here to there while this shot was made, this would be a problem for the tracker, and that's something we will look at in an advanced course of 3D tracking. But I mean, After Effects would track this person as well, and since he's not standing still, I mean, it will give errors in the camera solve. But for now, this is a very great result. So what we can do with this is, I just turn this render track points, I turn it off. I don't need to really have them rendered when I hit my play button. So what you can do is you can change the size of the track points. So that's something I sometimes play with to see some track points better, especially these ones in the back here. And of course, if you put it really very big, then the ones in the front will become a little bit cluttered. But anyway, so I'm gonna put this back to, let's say something like this. We can still see them. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna hover over my footage and have a look at maybe some track points that are giving a problem. But definitely what you need to know also is that when, for instance, I select some of these track points here in the back, you know, you can do this with a lasso tool. And when I delete them, After Effects is going to resolve the camera, and that's going to take some time. So in this case, I'm not going to do it because I know that this is a good camera track, especially when I you know, hover over these points. I mean, I see that the surface it's quite okay. So these are supposed to be flat surfaces. Also this over here and this in the foreground, supposed to be flat surfaces. So that looks pretty good. Here on the ground, I mean, this makes sense. So I think it's good. So the next thing you want to do is, because we still now have this 3D camera tracker effect on top of this layer here, if you want to see the track points, every time you have to actually select the layer and select the 3D camera tracker, and that's the only way he's basically going to show you these track points. So let's size them up just a little bit, because especially depending on what you would like to do with your footage, and what we are going to do with this footage is, let's have a look. What I want to do is I want to put something on this rock here. I would like to put something maybe here, but I would also like to put something over here in the back. So the first thing you want to do is basically create a camera. I can push this button, create a camera, and what After Effects is going to do, it's going to create a 3D camera. So that's this camera here, okay? But I'm going to delete this camera again because I'm not going to do it this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell After Effects where my origin and where my ground plane has to be. This is not only an easy thing when working with the 3D scene in After Effects, but we're also going to use Cinema 4D to put some 3D elements in here. And so by doing that, we're going to tell Cinema 4D as well what the ground plane is and where the origin basically is. So I deleted the camera. So what I can do right now is I can select some points. So I'm going to take this point, for instance. I'm going to hold the Shift button and take this point. And then I'm going to take this point. And as soon as I basically select 3 points, After Effects is going to give me this sort of a rectangle, and it's going to give me this target, which if I go over here with the mouse over the center of this target, you know, so you see the cursor changes, and you can push down the mouse button, left mouse button, and you can start to drag it around. See? So, and what basically happens is that in the perspective of your camera, this thing will go around in your scene. For instance, if I do it on this wall, which I'm going to do also, and I'm going to do it on these planes as well. But what you can also do is select more points. So it's very easy for me now to select a whole bunch of points onto this wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push my left mouse button and I'm going to lasso a whole bunch of points on this wall. And you see, it will give me one target that I can basically check if it's really working into my scene. And that seems to be pretty good. But for now, I'm just gonna first make my ground plane. So select this point, this point, this point. I might also want to select this point. So it's also always going to recalculate. So if I select this point, so it's very important to select points that really gives you the idea that this plane is really where it is supposed to be. Anyways, I'm gonna put my origin somewhere over here. So I have this target, position it over here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to crank up the size of the target. Why? Because I'm gonna make a solid, and a solid basically is going to be as big as your target size. And since this is the ground plane, I'm gonna just make it quite big. Okay, so that's good. And when I get back into the center of this target, when my cursor is changed to this moving sort of cursor, what you can do is you can right click your mouse and you get a whole bunch of options. The first thing to do, because that's what I want to tell. So before I create any object and the camera, I'm going to say set ground plane and origin. As soon as I do this, nothing really happens, but now After Effects knows that this is gonna be the ground plane of my 3D scene and that this is going to be the center of it. So I go back here, right click again, and now I say create a solid and a camera. Bam. So as soon as I've done this, After Effects has basically created a new solid, which is a red solid in this case. And notice also it is a 3D layer. So that's all automatically done by just creating this. And After Effects has created a 3D camera. So what I'm basically doing now is I'm looking at this solid through this camera. And when I now hover over my footage, see, this is basically what is happening. Okay, to make things a little more clear of what is really happening now, I would always like to put a grid onto this thing, just for purposes of testing here. I'm gonna put the grid effect on here. And so you get this kind of a grid effect, which is now lying onto the track solid. So if this grid is selected, you can basically, you know, scale up the grid, make the grid lines thinner or make them larger. I'm just gonna keep it something like this. 5 is good, 6 is good. I'm gonna, select some grid points here. Doesn't really matter how big it is. But what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go to my footage all the way in the back, and I'm going to start to position this 3D grid into my scene. So these lines are basically following, for instance, the lines of this wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it over the Z axis. I'm going to hit here rotate, or hit the W key, W, and I'm going to start to rotate it, and just make sure that this line here, something like this, that these lines are actually basically parallel to the wall. The next thing I want to check is I want to see if this grid really sticks to the floor. So what I can do is I can look at a point, maybe this here, this black point here, this little thing, and go through the footage and see if it really stays on the grid at the same time, at the same place. Okay, I now lose it. And see if the grid actually stays connected to this ground plane that I actually decided that was going to be the ground plane. That seems to do the job. And what you will also notice is, for instance, that over here it doesn't stick to the ground. So if you look at this point here and I go through the footage, it doesn't stick to the ground at all. And that is because this level of ground is higher than this level of ground. You don't really see it, but here you see there's a little step off. So it's normal that it doesn't stick here because it's not on the same height. Next thing I would like to do, just to make you a little bit familiar with what's really going on here, is I'm going to have a look at my top view. Okay, so this is now a top view. If I zoom out, what I can do is I can hit the C button or select here the camera tool, and I can hit it because I want to zoom out, maybe hit it 3 times, and now I can start to zoom out of my scene. That's something we saw in the basic 3D tutorial. After Effects is showing its other views only inside of this comp window, and to have all the elements basically in there, I just continue. Sorry, it's getting boring, but I continue to zoom out, and here he is. Here's my camera. So I can also, here is my camera. I can, of course, also change this size here. So I can put it to 50%, or press the dot key or the comma key to zoom in and zoom out. And what you now see is we have here this ground plane, which I made, and we have the camera, and this is the camera path. So if I just go over, you see this is the camera movement that's in the shot. I can also go to the front view. Also notice that this grid, where I selected this as being the origin, is also in the middle of this scene. Okay, see? So if I now go to my, for instance, left view, okay, and I zoom out again, so you will get a left view, and what you will see is that this baseline is basically somewhere in the middle of the scene, and this is the camera that is actually moving, I guess, away from this point, and it's going up a little bit, so that really makes sense in terms of what the real camera is actually doing. So now that I have this grid here, I'm just gonna rename it, and I'm just gonna call it ground plane. Okay, so let's hide this grid. So what else can we do? We just gonna show you a few quick things on what you can really do here. So when I want my tracking points back, I need to select my tracked layer. So I'm gonna recall this tracked footage. And you need to select this, and you need to select your 3D camera tracker, and then you get your points back. So let's get them down a little bit and zoom in just a small tiny bit here, and I still have my camera tool here selected, so I need to go to my selection tool. So I hit the V key, so we get this arrow again. And what you can do is you can basically select maybe one point. That's what something you can do. And you can right click, and then you can create a whole bunch of things. You can create a text, another solid, or a null object. In this case, let's, for fun, just create a text object. Once you do that, you create this new text object, and you can see that here there's a new layer that has basically a text object in there. And what I can do is I can type in something there. So my first text. Okie doke. So it's a 3D layer, so I hit the return key, and let's scale it up a little bit. Oopsie. It's my first text. Hit enter again. And what you will see, so After Effects basically created a text at this point, where at this track point, which I selected. So I think it was some like this point here. He created a text, and this text is going to be now in 3D space at the place where this rock basically sits, at the surface of this rock. Let's have a look if that is correct. So if we now go over, you know, you will see this text will definitely here at the S, it will stick to the stone. So what actually happens is there's no animation on this text. We're just only looking through the 3D camera at this 3D text, which is exactly positioned at where this stone is. So that is why this text is actually sticking to the stone. Let's try to put something over here as well. It's always fun to try a few things. So I need to select my tracked footage again, select this, and maybe make a new text. I need to select I'm still on the text tool. I need to select the V key and maybe put a new text over here. And let's type in here second text. Now let's resize it a little bit. Let's make it a little smaller. And what you can do now is you can basically rotate it. So, or you can move it. Because this point was on this rock, and this rock is basically a flat surface, I may consider to move it to the back. But when you start moving these objects in 3D space, it's always a good idea to use the arrow keys, you know. So if I wanted to rest on this rock, I can only use the Z and the X axis. And then it will move over the surface of this rock. As soon as I tilt it up, you will see it will no longer stick to the surface. So I'm gonna undo that. If I really want it to be stuck to the surface, then I shouldn't put it higher than it is already now. Let's have another look at this left view here. Where are these things? So here they are. So here's my text basically. Here is my ground plane. Here is my first text, and here is my second text, and there is my camera moving over it. If we have a look at the top view, you see the same thing. So if we zoom in here, so this is basically where I put the ground plane, I put a text over here, and I put another text over here. I can also have a look at the front view. Let's see if I can see. Well, no, the front view is not gonna work. I don't know really why it's not working, but it doesn't show the text objects. I think they're too far away into the scene. Let's have this saved. It's an auto save from the project. Okay. So I don't see anything here, but actually when I go back into my 3D camera view, so this is basically what is going on. Maybe I could select here 4 views and then this one to the left, and then you see the different views over here, and you can easily see the scene from some different kind of angles, and you can see what's really going on here. So I don't see anything in the front view. It's a bit bizarre. I only see the ground plane. I don't really know why. But anyway, so let's go back to one view and zoom in a little bit. So these objects are nicely stuck here to the ground.